just set my stuff on the stairway here because I know I'd be coming up again, but I wasn't sure when. I'm sorry about the way my house looks. It's since I lost my wife, I'll tell you, nothing's the same.
Your house looks great, but sorry to hear about your wife. Yeah,
oh, thanks. You never know how much your wife does for you until she's not here. Then all of a sudden you find out everything that she did.
Yeah. Look at this room, huh?
Well, it's not like Joe's. Joe's got a lot more, not more deer heads, but elk heads and everything.
Now that's a wide one.
My wife saw that before I did, and it was late in the day. She had a iron sight and she couldn't see the sight, so I ended up shooting it.
Was she tracking with you, or what were you?
No, I think it was like the second day of the season. It was right close to the beginning of the season anyways, and I just had her with me, and we were just coming back late in the afternoon along this deer run, and two does come up, and that buck was behind them. And I'm watching the does, and she says, "Oh, there's a big buck." And I kept saying, "No, there's not. There's two does." We're whispering.
Yeah.
She says, "No, there's a big buck." I said, "Ruth, there's two does. That's all. She says, look behind them." And sure enough, he come up behind. It's funny. Aging by tooth wear, they aged that deer 2.5. He weighed 181 pounds, and he could have been.
Wow.
So it shows you that age wearing is not
super accurate.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's a 2-year-old in the Adirondacks weigh 110 pounds.
Right, yeah. Right. That's about it.
Yeah.
This one here is the biggest one my dad shot.
That one on the top?
Yeah, that scored 138.
Mm-hmm.
Shot that in 63. That was the first 10-pointer I got. And that was 1961, I think. And that was my wife shot that one right there. It was the first deer she saw.
Did your wife do any tracking, or she would just go with you
she
and
just
kind of
wherever
poke
I
around
went.
the woods?
She would follow me, yeah, wherever I went. And golly, miss her a lot. I left my guns out here just in case you went out. This is probably my favorite rifle. The problem is it weighs a ton.
What is that rifle?
It's heavy. It's a Heckler & Koch 308. And I gave it to one of my nephews. He just hasn't picked it up yet.
So did you take that tracking with you, or you go with a lighter gun?
I took this tracking. In fact, I ended up the first buck I shot with it was a 10-pointer. And tracked him right to his bed. And then he ran out, so I stopped and said a rosary. And I tracked him again and come right up to him, going up the ridge on the other side.
Huh.
Anyways, I love the rifle, but it's lifted. You can see how heavy it is.
Yeah, that's not what you expect a tracker to be carrying there.
That's right. In fact, Joe DeNeal's father, when he found out that I got this rifle, I went over to his house to visit him.
Yep.
And he says, "Wait, I got something for you." He comes out, he's got a 2x4 with 2 wheels on it. He said, "This is for your new gun." Which was good.
That's great. The Hunt Suburbia podcast presents the Living Legends of Deer Hunting series, a special 2-part series with deer hunting legend Jim Massett. All right, we've got another episode of the Living Legend series. And I'm sitting here with legendary deer tracker.
Legendary.
Jim Massett.
What a case.
You wouldn't say that you're legendary, would you? I think you're too humble for that.
People say that, but I don't know. The only thing legend is my old age.
So we are here in Chittenango, New York, right?
Right.
You grew up here your whole life, or where did
No,
you
I
grow up?
I lived just outside of Syracuse for a while. Then my parents moved to a place in Bridgeport, which is not that far from here, same county, same town even. And they sold me their house when I got married, so my wife and I had a place to move in right after we were married in 1960. And I lived there till 85, and I moved here. My wife and I moved here in April of 85. So I've been here ever since.
Now, and you've been deer hunting the Adirondacks your whole life, or where did you start hunting, actually?
Started hunting rabbits, actually, with my father Used to hunt in the southern zone here. Probably when that time I was 8 or 9 years old. And my father was a great tracker. That's what he did. He used to wait till the snow comes, and then he'd track the rabbits down out in the field and then jump them up and shoot them. And that's where I started tracking, really. I was probably 8 or 10. But tracking rabbits was not a lot of difference than tracking deer, except that with deer you got to go a lot farther. Sometimes too far.
Your dad, was he a big influence on you hunting? What did your dad mean to you? Tell me a little bit about your dad.
Okay, let me see. My dad was a hard worker. His parents came from Germany, so my grandparents were German. They had a small place, small farm they called it. They had a few chickens and stuff like that, and maybe a cow, but mostly fruit. They grew fruit. And the household is still there. I lived in it for a number of years. Then we moved, swapped with one of my father's sisters. And then, I grew up in a little town called Lindcourt, just outside of Syracuse. And my parents had a camp up on Chenango Creek, which is not too far from here. Mm-hmm. And we used to spend summers there. And I don't know, followed along my father. I had a lot of cousins that deer hunted. My father hunted with them. And it was funny because my father's influence, especially on me, whenever somebody shot a deer and wounded it, they'd come and get my father to track it. So it's probably one of the reasons why I started tracking so intently, just like my brother does. Anyways, that's kind of the beginning.
And that's a different kind of tracking a little bit, but it probably gets your gears going to, you're tracking blood, you're trying to read the sign. But so that's interesting. He started by being such a great tracker to recover deer.
Yes.
Right?
That's right. Yeah, it was just funny because I can remember when I first started hunting, there was people that had shot deer out of the camp we hunted out of, because we hunted mostly with relatives. Sometimes there was as many as a dozen of us in the camp. And it was just a great time of my life. That was in the 1950s. And whenever somebody wounded a deer, especially if it was on bare ground, they'd get my father to track it. And it was, I don't know, probably a takeoff from that where I started.
What do you think his success rate was in recovering deer?
I can't even guess. I can't even guess. I really can't. Yeah. If the deer was vitally hit, anybody could have got him. But
yep.
I can remember one time in particular we were hunting. It was Thanksgiving weekend. There was about 16, 18 inches of snow on the ground. We're just going back to our camp that we had. We had acquired. We just had the camp. That's all it was. It was a piece of property that Gould Paper owned. And it was the last weekend that we were going to hunt. And my cousin was up ahead of us, and he shot at a deer. And my father was standing a watch. So he said, why don't you go ahead and come and see what he shot at? So I goes up there, and there's my cousin there. And I asked him about what he shot. And he said, I shot at a buck across the river. There was just, a small river. And I said, well, let's go track it. He said, no, we'll wait for your father. So we go over there, and sure enough, my father come over and found it was just a 6-pointer, but he was happy with it. That was Thanksgiving weekend. I can't remember the year. It had to be. It was before I hunted, so it probably was 49 or 50.
49 or 50.
Yeah.
What year were you born? How old are you these days?
86. I feel like I'm 102, but I'm only 86. I was born on May 2nd, 1937. You think about that, I used to laugh all the time about the old people. Now I am one.
Now, you maybe feeling like you're 102 has something to do with the fact that you carried so many deer out on your back after you shot them, right?
You know what? That probably helped me more than hindered.
You think so?
Oh, yeah. I'm almost positive.
Yep, kept you in shape.
Used to help keep in shape. I did a lot of running for a lot of years, and that also, kept me in shape. But there's so much about carrying deer. It's a mind over matter thing. A lot of people don't realize that, but I have even some of my relatives now, they put a deer in their back, and they're a lot bigger than I was. At that time, I weighed 135 pounds. I fought as a lightweight. And those guys are, 180, 190, 200 pounds. They carry a deer for about 15, 20 minutes and say it's too much. It's a mind over matter thing.
They're not used to it.
Yeah, it's not used to it. It's mind over matter.
Now, but the reason you started doing it, wasn't it because it's harder to drag from being, if you're way out in the woods the way that you hunt in the Adirondacks, is it harder to, or it's just a different
It's actually easier than dragging.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole trouble is you got to get used to the weight on your back, and that's the thing. In fact, just a short story. I think it was around 1946 or 47. My father and one of my cousins had killed a bear, and the only way they ever had to carry him to get him out of the woods yesterday was either drag him or carry him.
Yep.
So they found out that carrying was a lot easier. So they decided that they were going to try to carry this bear out. So they tied the bear in a pack like we usually do. I'll define that a little later if you want me to. But anyways, my father got the bear on his back, and he staggered through the woods. He said about 150, 200 yards and dropped it down. He said, no, it's too heavy. We figured it weighed 300 pounds.
The fact he even had it on his back for that,
I know,
that far.
My father was a lot bigger than me. He was probably most of the time 180, 190 pounds and a little over 6 foot. But anyways, he was a great packer too. Almost all of my relatives, the same thing. They carried a deer. I remember there was one of my cousins shot a deer, and that was probably in, I'm trying to think of, probably around 1949. He shot a deer with 12 miles back in the woods, and they carried it all the way out.
In the same one day? The same
yep. Well, it was a couple of days after he shot it, but the one day they took it all the way out. Yeah.
So if you're that far back in the woods, would you leave them there sometimes, go back, get your supplies?
Go back or maybe get help or something like that, yeah. We hunted mostly in those days in the Moose River Plains, and they did a lot of logging after the war. They started a road to go back into the Moose River Plains. Actually, the Gould Paper Company owned a big property in front of the plains, which was state, and then on the other side of the plains, so they actually got a road to go all the way back in and log off some of their areas. And I can remember when they started building the road. But before they had the road, them guys used to carry their deer out on their back just on an old wagon trail. And I'll tell you, it was rough. Golly, it was swampy and muddy, and some places they had corduroy where it was swampy, but it was really enjoyable. Never forget it.
Now, what has changed over the years in the tracking? You know, when was the last time you tracked? A couple of years ago? Last year? Did you go hunting? When did you kind of give up tracking or whatever?
Probably I'm going to say probably 3 years. I never really gave it up. I had an incident that happened about I don't know, probably 4 years ago now. I'm chief cook in a bottle washer in the camp now because I'm old. Anyways, I left.
That's an important job.
I left the camp about 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Left a note. We're going to have moose meat for supper because we'd killed a moose that year, and I'll be back about 6 o'clock. Well, I got out and went to a place. It's called Sagamore. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of roads that go back in. I went back in and I picked up a nice buck track. Now I'm like 2:30 in the afternoon. And there's snow on the ground, but there was some old snow before that, so it was snow on top of old snow, and it was kind of crunchy. Anyways, I picked up a buck track, and I started tracking it, and he went through all these deer beds that was there, smelling everyone, so I knew it was a buck anyhow. Went down into a swamp, gets into the swamp, and all of a sudden I look up and says, it's dark. I said, I can't track him anymore, I got to leave. I turned around and started to come out, like there was probably 7 inches of snow, and my legs wouldn't work. I couldn't figure out what the trouble was. I'd go about 10 yards and have to stop. So something that should have taken me 45 minutes took me over 5 hours to get out. Of course, everybody back in camp wondering where I'm at, my brother especially. So they knew where I went, so they come up, and it was just kind of funny because after dark, you don't hear any shots. So the first thing you do when it's after dark, nobody shows up, you shoot. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to get my way out. I'm still probably, I don't know, it was probably, I'm going to say 8 o'clock at night. And I heard a shot. And I go to answer the shot. I always unloaded my gun when it got dark. Mm-hmm. I go to load up my gun again. I dropped the shell in the snow, fumbled around, got another one, went to put it in the gun, jammed. Just one of those things happened, one right after another. So it was probably like 10 minutes after he had shot. Yep. And I just finally get the shell in the gun, and I hear his truck drive away. He was probably a mile and a half away, but I could hear his truck. So I shoot now, and they're in the truck driving. They don't hear no shot.
Yeah.
So anyways, and I stumbled my way out of the woods. They end up calling the ranger up there. My nephew calls the ranger and said, hello. He says, this is Tom Massett calling. I'm calling about my Uncle Jim. He's lost in the woods. And the guy says, yeah, right. And he hangs up the phone.
Jim Massett's not lost.
Yeah, it's not lost. Well, I really wasn't lost. I just couldn't walk. Anyhow, they come in after me. I got ahead of them somehow, and I ended up getting out about 11 o'clock at night. By then, they had the troopers. They had people from down here coming up to look for me, and there I am on the road with my head between my legs because I was so stupid. But anyways, so since that time, I haven't been able to walk very much.
Okay. How was the moose meat when you got back?
I think we ate about 1 o'clock in the morning.
There you go.
And I didn't even prepare it. They did.
Well, so that was your last kind of track that you
That
took.
was probably the last one. Although I did, not last fall, the fall before last, I tracked a nice buck, but I just can't travel very far. In fact, it was two bucks on the same mountain. And,
But you're still going to camp.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm still going to camp, and I still get out, maybe just a little bit, but I still get out. And you never know. There's one of the bucks up on the wall up there that's the furthest one over on the left-hand side. It's a 13-pointer.
That's a crazy-looking deer there.
It is crazy. And it was funny because my brother was ahead of me. There was about a foot of snow on the ground, and I stopped to pick up a guy that was hiking in. And my nephew Tom was with me. That would be my brother's son. And we're driving along, and they were ahead of us. And we come along here, and I picked up a track going across the road. So I look at every track that crosses. I got out and looked, and one was a nice buck track, and one was a doe track. So we went along a little further, and they crossed the road again. Went along a little further, crossed the road. The guy says, Tom, take this guy where he's got to go. I got to track that buck. So anyways, I started tracking it. I ended up killing the buck about, probably 25, 30 yards off the road was all. I shot him, wounded him, he ran a ways, and I ended up having to shoot him again. But it turned out to be a 13-pointer, and didn't score all that much, but just an unusual-looking head.
Oh, it's a great-looking
different,
rack there.
Very different-looking.
So how, do you remember how much he weighed?
It was only in the 160s. He wasn't a huge buck, but his older deer, probably 7.5, I think.
Yep, looks like an older rack.
Yeah. Just kind of funny. So you never know. I tracked that deer probably 20, 25 minutes, and I killed him. There's other ones I tracked 2 different days and still never got them.
Yep.
So you just don't know.
Yeah, that's what makes it exciting too,
That's
right?
right, yeah. Makes it exciting. And then the fact is that, you just never know. You get on a track, and the deer could be not just a little ways up ahead of you, or it could be 10 miles ahead of you. You don't know. You'll see when you interview Joe.
Yep.
In my mind, he's probably the top today, and all you got to do is look at his record. My brother and I used to figure we track between 30 and 40 bucks a season.
Wow.
Now, the whole difference is knowing the difference between a buck track and a doe track. So if I come up to a track and I said, yeah, it's a buck, and I went 20 yards because I didn't want to shoot him, so I tracked the buck. So that was how we counted him. Joe ends up, I think in the last 20 years, his average buck kill is 6.5 years old. I mean, I don't know anybody that could come up with that and do that kind of a record. And like I said, me and my brother, we probably between us, we'd say we tracked 30 or 40 bucks. Out of that, if you got 1 out of 10 or saw 1 out of 10 that you could shoot was good.
Yep.
Joe's 1 out of 3. He only hunts 5
So you
days
would
a
track it until you saw it, and if you didn't want it, you'd pass
Oh,
it. That's
yeah,
what you
yeah.
call tracking a buck, not just
Right.
walking the track for 20 yards and going, no, the track's not big enough.
Yeah.
It was until you saw it.
No. Just like you said. Until
Okay.
you said deer's not big enough.
Okay.
I
Yep.
just won't try. I know it's a buck,
Yep.
but I just don't want to track them any further.
Yep.
Then you say, how do you know it's a buck? Well, probably the easiest way to tell is when a deer urinates. And they'll urinate a lot more than people think. And learning the difference between what a doe urinates and how a buck urinates is sometimes it's different. Both bucks and does urinate on their hocks. So, it'd be very difficult to tell which one was which when they urinate on their hocks. But if you figure the physical makeup of a buck and a doe, the buck's urination stand has got to be either right between the legs because they squat a lot, or a little bit in front, where a doe is usually in the middle or a little bit further behind. So, but you have to really pay attention.
Yeah, because out here you'll, I don't know. I'm sure the differences in the buck and doe track sizes are,
Yes.
comparable to anywhere else too. But the overall track size is a little bit smaller than like Maine, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because a couple of guys that hunt Maine come back here to hunt in New York, and they say, boy, said, you know what, it's funny, you got some big tracks here, but the deer aren't that big. And they aren't. In fact, if you interview Randy Flannery, he'll tell you there's a line that goes all the way across from the east to the west. They call it the snake line.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they call it the snake line, to the south of that line, there are poisonous snakes. To the north of that line, there's not very many poisonous snakes. So they call it the snake line. And it's the same thing with the deer. The deer in the south of that line, some of them will go over 200, but not that many. You get to the north of that line, and a lot of the deer are over 200 pounds. In fact, a 3.5-year-old deer could weigh 220, 230. Down here, it's not like that. One of the big, it's funny, one of the big things that I enjoyed doing, and I never read anything about it, never saw anything about it, and I was going back in. I went to church in the morning, and we're going back into a remote camp they had. It was about 6 miles back in from where we could park. And it was on a Sunday, and I can remember I had my pack and my rifle and everything. I didn't even load my rifle, but there was about 4 inches of snow on the ground. It was about 40 degrees. And just a nice day, sunny and everything. Well, I stopped at a little creek to get a drink. And I remember the year very well. It was 1970. Stopped to get a drink. I got my cup out and looked, and there was a big buck track there across right where I stopped to get a drink. I said, "Holy smokes!" I didn't even take my rifle. I just followed him for a ways. I was so enthused with the size of his track. And he stopped to feed, and there was a windfall, probably about 6, 8 inches off the ground, and the snow was on the side of that because it had snowed like a couple of days before. And his antler imprints are all over there. I could see 4 imprints all along there. And I'm thinking, I've been hunting for 20 years. How come I never saw that before? Never read anything about it, never saw anything about it, never even thought to look for it. But I want to tell you, after that, I looked at every track I come across, there was a buck track. Then all of a sudden you start seeing articles about that. So I can't say I was the only one that ever saw it, because I remember Lanny Benoit telling me, he said, I don't look for the sign and the thing so much. He says, I look how a deer steps around a tree to tell how wide his spread is.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have never thought of that either.
Yeah. Yeah, if he's got to go around.
Yeah, right. You got to step
weave
around
his head in and out.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other thing that, that's pretty important, a lot of people don't realize, a buck knows the width of his spread and the height of his antlers within a fraction of an inch. So when anything is too tight, they won't go through. They'll go around. Or if anything's too low, they won't go under it. They'll go over the top of it. So it's one of the things that you can pay attention to if you're hunting. You're hunting at a buck track. You wait and see if he stops and feeds. Most of the time, the antler prints will be in the ground. You can tell how close his antlers come. If he's feeding beside a log, like I said earlier, you can tell about how many points he has, about the thickness of his horns. I tracked 2 bucks one time. One of them, in fact, came right off of a mountain. He stopped to eat and stuck his head in the snow. It was about 8 inches of snow, stuck his head in the snow, and he had a little narrow spread. I said, I don't even follow him. So I ended up picking up another buck track. I ended up killing that buck with a 10-pointer. But I let the other one go.
Yeah.
Just that it didn't have a rack I wanted to shoot.
Now look at that thing's got a narrow spread, that 13-pointer.
Yeah, it did. It did. But I mean, that deer, I didn't even have to. It was I only tracked him about 20 minutes.
Yep.
It was the one right below that I ended up killing up on the top of the mountain. In fact, it's one of the ones I'm carrying there, I think.
Yep, that's a nice, beautiful rack there, too. Oh, is that the one in this?
Yeah, I think
that
this
picture,
is
maybe?
the one right here, right?
Yep. So that's the...
it's in the book, yeah.
Yep, that's the famous picture I've seen online quite a bit.
Have you? Yeah, really.
Long main beams on it.
It did. I think they were 25 inches.
Yep. Well, that's great. How old were you in this picture? That was 1970, you said?
No, that would be, I think, around 86, 87.
Oh, okay. Yep. In your prime.
Yeah, right.
Prime years.
Yeah, the prime years. I guess you would call it that.
How many deer do you think? I don't know if you know, but how many bucks have you killed?
I never really went and counted them all, but it's got to be over 100. Probably over 100 bucks. Yeah. And you stop to think about that. I hunted a number of different states like that. I hunted Maine, hunted Northwest Ontario. So it isn't like I killed them all in New York, but most of these come from New York. There's only 2 in here. One from Saskatchewan and one from Maine. Number the only 2 here that are not New York State bucks.
Yeah, that's the Saskatchewan right there.
Yes,
the dark antlers.
Yeah, how could you tell that?
The dark antlers.
The dark
I don't know.
antlers.
There's something about Saskatchewan, dude.
It is. They are. They're all dark. It's because they rub the softwoods.
Now Joe was telling me too about this. This is really neat. And after we're done with this, I'll take the camera around and get some close-ups. But The fact that on all of your Euro mounts on your skull, you wrote down stats and details about the deer, right?
Yes, I did. And I did that on purpose because after I shot 3 or 4, I'm thinking, somewhere down the line, I'm going to have to try to figure out where I shot that deer and when I shot it. So I try to put some information on each one. Of course, some of them I forgot. But
so this one is your main buck.
Yes.
Yep.
And it was funny. I shot that deer pretty early in the morning, and my brother had picked up the track later on. And he said, I didn't realize it, but he was tracking a dead deer all the time. I hid it in the back of his truck by the time he come out. He was a little upset about that, but, he's done the same thing to me before.
Now, you're right. It was pretty early in the morning because you wrote it down so I can see it. Let's test your memory. Do you remember when?
What year, you mean?
Yeah.
Or what
year?
No, I don't even remember what year. I don't even remember what time it was, but I know that we had seen this buck the day before and decided to go back and try to hunt him. And don't he cross the road right in the same place? So I had my brother let me off there. Of course, I didn't know the buck hadn't crossed yet. I just cut in the woods. I wasn't in the woods, I don't think 20 minutes. And he ended up, he's coming right towards me. I shot him.
He was coming back on his track.
Yeah, coming right back to cross the same place he did before.
Yeah.
It might have been a couple of days before, but anyways, it was just another story.
So shot at 6:50 a.m., state of Maine, 1998. Boone and Crockett score 114. He's got some nice mass on him. I mean, he looks a little bigger.
It turned out it wasn't that old a deer.
3.5.
Yeah.
Trailed for 10 minutes. 3 shots, Ruger 308. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's funny. Oh, golly, it's got to be, Pat, I'm not sure how many years ago, but New York State used to keep track of all the bear skulls that they had that people had shot and given to them. And they used to write on them. And I said, it'd be good to write on the skulls of the deer. So that's when I started. It wasn't my idea. The state had done it before me.
Yep.
But they did it on bear hunts, but I decided to do it on deer skulls.
Yep. Well, that's a good way to not forget.
Yeah, you said it. I go back and look. And a lot of times I have to go back and look because I forget the years.
Now, it says 3.5 on that. Is that from your tooth wear aging?
No.
Or how are you aging?
That's the other way of aging is you send them into the department, they soak them in acid, and then they cut the thing like you would on a tree, only not crossways, they cut it lengthways.
Yep.
They put it under a microscope and they can count the annual rings, and it's like 97% accurate.
Yeah.
So
all of the ones on the skulls are the accurate ones.
Yes.
Okay.
The ones that were sent back to the state are the ones that are accurate. I don't know if Steve will bring it, but I had a whole chart from 6 months to I think the oldest one I had was 11 and a half years in there, but they were all ones that were guaranteed. Now they're between like 2.5 and 3.5. There's not, if you age those, they wouldn't change very much from wear to under a microscope.
Mm-hmm.
When they get over 3.5, they could be off 2-3 years.
Yeah.
I'll give you a classic example. The New York State record book buck, the biggest one ever taken in New York State, was killed in I think 1939, and that deer was mounted with the whole skull and everything in it, and they said that the deer was, I think they said the deer was 4.5 years old. At any rate, they found sheds from that deer like a couple of years before that, and it actually ended up scoring more, and it would have been 2.5 years old, and there's no way.
Yeah.
There's just no way. So that was where a lot of the people that, used the wear to tell them that deer finally decided, well, maybe it's not as accurate as we thought. But that was a classic example. A deer had to be at least 6.5.
That deer was on his way down.
Sure. Well, I don't know if it was on his way down.
He lost score rack wise. I mean, yeah.
Like even the deer that Steve shot was 8.5.
Yep. They
won this year and it scored just a little over 160.
Yeah.
So who knows? The year before it might have been bigger, and it might not have been.
The buck that my buddy shot a couple years ago was 11.5 years old, and its biggest rack was when it was 10. 10
really?
10 was its biggest year. But it would go up and down. It was big at 7, it dropped a little bit at 8, and went up at 9 or something like that. But every year it kind of bounced up and down once it reached 7.
I never would have thought that.
And its largest antlered year was at 10 years old. And
10 years old. Holy
scored 170 something at 11.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was that a Massachusetts deer?
Yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
What a deer that was, huh?
Yep. there's something about, I don't know, because they say, Midwest, the 5.5 is the prime best antlers, whatever they studied for that in the Midwest, and maybe that may be the case there, but it doesn't seem that it seems like it's older in the Northeast.
I think it could be. It very well could be. I remember a story that they told about in the Moose River Plains, somebody had seen a deer that had died during the winter, and it said it was an older buck. The shed antlers were gone and everything on it, I believe. I'm not positive about that part. But anyhow, somebody had found the deer because the whole carcass and everything was there, but the antlers were gone, and they drug it out on the ice in one of the ponds. In fact, it was Helldiver's Pond. And somebody had talked to somebody in the department, and they were wondering about, that deer was so old, why did it die? And especially with it was a big buck. So they ended up, I could have the numbers off a little bit. They ended up in the spring going back, and they found the carcass of that deer underneath in the water. They dug the thing up, and I believe they said it was 16 years old.
Wow.
In the wild. Now, like I said, I could be off a few years with the numbers, but I don't remember exactly. But it was really something that stuck in my mind.
That's an old buck.
You said it.
Huh.
And it still had the big pedestal, so it was a decent buck, But probably died during the winter.
I know there was a 19-year-old doe shot in Vermont a few years ago. So
is that right? Wow, I didn't know that either.
Yep.
19. Wow.
So, doe.
I had heard about ones that were kept in captivity that lived 20 or 21 years. But in a while, they didn't think they went that long. But they do.
They did. Well, the doe, I guess. But, the bucks have a little harder life.
Yeah, right.
Especially around these parts, escaping you. And I'm sure there's a ton of great hunters in your deer camp, too.
Camp. Boy, some of my great nephews, I'll tell you, they're really doing well. And they,
everybody tracking out of that camp, or people get different styles? Or?
Most everybody tracks now.
Yeah.
You start telling the stories and about the big bucks, so everybody wants to find a buck track and track them. And that's a big difference with hunting in the big woods. I mean, you don't have to worry about another hunter getting ahead of you. You don't have to worry about going across a piece of private property. You get on a track and you could take it usually as far as you have to go. I don't know how many times, and Joe will tell you the same thing, I don't know how many times I got in a deer track early in the season, tracked them, and end up further behind them at the end of the day than it was at the beginning. And that's after 10 miles. So you don't know. It could be up there a couple of 100 yards. It could be up there 10 miles away. You don't know. Certainly with 4 legs, they travel a lot faster than we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they know the terrain a little better probably.
No doubt about that, yes.
What is it about the Adirondacks that's special to you?
Probably the remoteness and the difference in the mountains. It's mountainous territory. Just like I forget who it was that told me that, but they said you want to be. It's like a mountain goat when you hunt the Adirondacks. That might have been. Oh, golly, why can't I think his name is dead now? But anyhow, it is. The Adirondacks is, I've hunted Northwest Ontario, I've hunted Quebec, I've hunted Maine, and the Adirondacks is just tougher. It's harder to hunt just because of the thickness of the terrain and the steepness of the hills,
Less roads
Less roads.
Into pieces,
that
right?
was the thing that got me the most about Maine. Not every place you went, there was a road, because they did so much logging there. New York State has this thing they call Forever Wild, and you can't cut any timber off of state land, even if to help your deer herd or anything, you can't do it. So it's called Forever Wild. It's called Article 14 in the state constitution, and so there just aren't that many roads. And of course, you know how they do when they log. Years ago, when they logged, they used to use bulldozers, and they had beautiful roads to hunt on. Now they use the skidders, and you have to watch out. You'll step in a hole that's 3 foot deep,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that's just logging is a different operation now than it was then.
But that makes it harder for people to find tracks or to get deep, and which also makes it attractive for the right kind of hunter, right?
That's right, exactly. Yeah, good point.
So you probably didn't do a lot of driving to pick up tracks. You were getting out of the car,
just traveling,
and just walking,
just traveling. Yep, just looking for that track. And when you interview Joe, he'll tell you some things that a lot of people don't realize. Now, I'm a little different than Joe. Of course, he's a little older than him, but if I come to a place that looks good, I'll still hunt through it. Joe don't do that. He's still looking for that track. He don't care how good it looks. He's looking for that track, and he'll tell you that. But when I see a place that looks good, I'll still hunt through it. And I've killed a few deer that way, even though I was looking for a buck track. Ended up seeing a deer before I even saw his track.
Does that matter to you? Because I know sometimes, for a pure track or somebody who just loves tracking so much, there's this thing, it seems like, where if you're tracking a deer but you shoot a satellite buck or something, it doesn't feel as the same as if you got the one that you're on.
Doesn't bother me a bit. Doesn't bother me at all. I would shoot him if it looked like a decent buck, I would shoot him. It's funny.
Yeah, it's just hunting.
Yeah, right. We're working on another book, and I have a story in there about a buck I killed on opening day of the season. I was on top of a mountain. It was a club I belonged to. It was Kemshell Mountain Club, and I was right up on top of the mountain, just easing along. No snow naturally. It was probably 60 degrees, and all of a sudden I looked down and there's a deer standing at me, and I looked and I said, "Gee golly, that's a nice looking buck." But his points looked kind of short. He turned his head and I counted 5 points, and I said, he's probably 10. I better shoot. So I'm not a very good shot, anyways. I ended up tracking that deer for almost all day. I hit him in the back leg, ended up tracking him all day. He finally swam across the pond, and I thought I saw where he went into the pond. This is after tracking all day. So I went on the other side, and I get over there. The story will be a little bit more explainable when it's in the book. But anyways, I got on the other side, and there's a road on the other side, probably 30 feet from or 30 yards from the pond. I looked for up and down that road for the deer's track. It never crossed. I said, he's got to be in between this little bitty area. So I walked down probably, I'm going to say 10 or 12 yards from the pond, and nothing. I said, golly, there's the tree I looked at from the other side. I'd be right here. I took 2 more steps. I was probably 8 yards from the pond, and he jumped up and jumped in the pond.
Oh, back in?
I started to swim back across the other side, and I sat down on the bank, and I said, when you come up on the other side, you're going to die. And he did.
Well, you probably did. So that's funny. And I had a doe that I shot with a muzzleloader out of my Vermont camp. Did the same thing. It jumped into the pond. She was gut shot. She jumped into the pond, and she was swimming across. I went all the way to the other side. She saw me there. She turned around. She swam back the other side. We walkie-talkied back to camp. All the hunters came down and was like, "Hey, this doe is like, she's just swimming around the pond." So we had a person in each corner. And eventually she swam. She did a few laps of this pond, and she came out finally right to me, like she knew.
Right to you.
She walked up to me, but she gave up. You could tell she was so tired.
Yeah.
And she just gave me this look, and I remember it. And it was just like, I'm done.
I'm done. That's all. Yep.
Yeah.
This is the end.
Yeah.
I remember a story that Lanny Benoit told us about. He had a walkie-talkie, and he's talking to his brother. He shot this buck, and it jumped in a lake on him. This was, I think, in Canada. I'm not sure if it was Northwest Ontario or where it was, but it jumped in the lake and started swimming across. So Larry ends up getting a boat, not getting a boat, but watching a deer. He says he's watching a deer swimming along there, and he's talking to his brother on his phone or whatever he had there, and his brother says to him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm watching my deer drowned." So he went back and he ended up getting a motor. They ended up going out to where the buck went down, and sure enough, they found it down there. It was laying on the bottom.
Huh.
Ended up bringing it back. It was a nice buck, too.
Wow.
Anyways, maybe if you talk to Lanny, you can get that story out of him.
Yep.
It was a great story.
Yeah.
Well, even had pictures of it. Had pictures of the deer down in the water there.
Yeah, we'll have to try to remind him at Huntstock about that.
Yeah. Really. I'm sure he'll tell you the story. Talk about the Benoits. Of course, I knew Larry. I don't know. This is something I could add to this thing here. My father bought Larry's book. He bought one for me and one for my brother, for my 2 brothers, in fact. And that book came out in, I think, 1973 or 74. So my father thought it was such a good book. He gave each one of us the book. So I read the book, and I don't know if you read it. If you probably did, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, it was written in that book that Larry ran after these deer. Anyhow, he chased these deer over. So now I did a lot of running. I said, I'm going to start chasing these deer. So it was like 10 years. I'm running through the woods chasing these bucks. A lot of them I missed, but a lot of them I got, too. Anyways.
You were actually running.
Oh, yeah. I ran. Miles and miles I ran.
You'd find a track and you'd
run
along
track,
it.
If the deer was moving fast, I'd run right along the track. And I did it for a lot of years. 10 years, in fact. When I finally got a chance to meet Larry, I said, boy, that's really a book the book that you wrote is really something. I said, I've been running after deer for 10 years now. I said, it's really a lot of fun. I said, he looked at me, he said, Jim, I never ran after a deer in my life. Peter Miller put that in a book, and he says, I never ran a step after a deer. And I'm thinking, here I am 10 years running after these deer, and he never did. I thought that was funny.
That is funny.
Yeah.
And that's, I would imagine that would be a fun way to actually do it. If you're in shape.
I can't tell you how many miles I ran.
Yeah.
Miles and miles and miles. I had a nice buck one time that I trailed. I won't go through the whole story, but anyways, there had been snowed about 16 inches the night before. The day before that, it rained like heck, and I had a bolt-action rifle. And I knew it rained so much that I might have trouble if it got real cold. So I took the bolt out of the rifle and I put it right on the wood stove that night. My father and I got up in the morning and there was about 10 inches or 12 inches of snow. And the temperature had dropped like, I don't know, 50 degrees, 60 degrees. It was like 10 above zero or something like that. We drove to another spot, started hunting. Anyways, make a longer story short, I finally come up on this buck right on top of a mountain. And I pull up to shoot at him, and when I pulled the trigger, the gun went click. That's all it was, a piece of ice or something in the bolt, and that thing wouldn't fire. As soon as that deer heard that click, boy, he was gone. I want to tell you, I ran, and I chased, and I did everything you could think of to try to catch up with that buck. I never did. He had at least a 24-inch spread. It might have been wider. And I never did catch up with him. He ran in other deer's tracks. He went in cricks. He walked back on his tracks to try to get rid of me. He did everything. Finally, about 4:30 in the afternoon, I was supposed to meet my father at 5 o'clock, and I had my truck, so he didn't have no way to get out except for me. So I was supposed to meet at 5. It was 4:30. I look at my watch, and I'm like, I don't know, probably 4.5, 5 miles from my truck. So I started running. And I can remember, even though it was cold, the sweat was dripping right off my face. I get to my truck, and my father ain't there. I look at him up on the windshield, and there's a note. Jim, rode out with Cousin Ray. See you back at camp. I'd been running for almost an hour, over an hour. I think it was 5:30 when I got back. But anyways, it was kind of funny.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
But and you mentioned you love the Tour de France too. So,
yes.
So did you cycle back in the day at all?
Yeah, some of the places we hunted up in Newcomb one time, and there was roads that went all over there, and we used to ride a bike in once in a while. I did meet a couple of guys that hunted in Moose River Plains, and of course there was roads all over there at the time. And they used to ride their bikes in, and if they shot a deer, they would set the deer on a bike somehow, and they would put the gut part of it over the seat and the head out over the front, and they'd push it up the hills and ride it down the hills, and that's how they got their deer up. So I don't even know who the guys were, but I don't know, maybe they'll show up to one of these things that you do, and you'll find out about it, yeah.
Yeah, nowadays people use electric bikes when you
That's
can.
true.
Yeah,
that's true. One of Dave Williams has an electric bike.
Yep. Handy tool in the right spot.
Yeah, sure it is, especially if you can use them. Now, a lot of places in the Adirondacks especially, you can't use them. Mm-hmm. No motorized vehicles.
Again, that's what makes it special, though, right?
That's true.
Like, it makes the Adirondacks
different.
You want to work hard for it, you know?
That's right.
It feels better when you work hard. Now, did you ever, during those times when you were running after deer, did you actually ever run one until it got exhausted and stopped and you shot it, or it was just a run to catch up and then you'd get there and you would slow down?
I don't believe I ever ran one that stopped because they were exhausted. They always stopped to see what's behind them.
Yeah.
And to see if you're still chasing them. A deer's funny. If you just happen to jump a deer, just bump one, and he don't see you or don't smell you, they'll run a little ways and they'll stop and see what it was. If you end up having one smell you, they'll run for a long ways. And if they have two of their sense, if they smell you and see you, smell you and hear you, boy, they go for a long ways. And they're watching really, really close about what's coming along. So, just like I said at the beginning, there's some of the deer you'll chase, so they might only be a short ways ahead of you, and the next time they might be 10 miles ahead of you. You don't know. But that's what makes it so much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your overall kind of style of tracking? Because everyone's got a different style. Were you pretty fast on a track? Were you slow?
I try to go fast when the deer's moving fast, and I go slow when the deer's moving slow. Joe's got the combination. What you'll see when you interview him, he's got a combination that just seems to work every time for him. Very few deer that he's tracked and gets close to him that he don't kill, because he's that good. He really is. And, a lot of the ones I've jumped them 3, 4, or 5 times and not got them, and jumped them 3, 4, or 5 times and killed them at the end.
Yep.
So, I mean, Uh, Probably my biggest problem is I don't have enough patience. My brother tells you the same thing. He's the same way. Don't have enough patience. Where Joe has got the patience to stand there. Haven't told you about the one he got in Maine. I think this past year there, he was in a wicked rainstorm when he ended up killing that deer, and the water's running down on me. He's shivering and freezing, but he ends up killing the deer.
Oh, I think I saw you recorded a little video of that last year, maybe.
Yes. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of snow on the ground still, or some snow, but it was raining. Yeah.
It was raining, pouring rain, and it's cold. You get that rain on top of the snow. One year, Pat, I was a member of this club up there. I think I told you before. It was a Kempshall Mountain Club, and it had snowed. Opening day of the season, there was 18 inches of snow on the ground. Opening day, that was October 25th. And I drive up to the place where I'm going to hunt, and I start in the woods, and there's all this snow, and it's pouring rain. And it's like 35, 38 degrees. The trees are dripping all over. I run into a nice buck track. Didn't go too far, run into another buck, and the buck and the two of them were fighting. And they had a fight there, and I said, well, I'll just pick one of them and follow. So I followed it, I'm going to say maybe an hour. And I come up to the deer, and I spooked him. He jumped out, and I put the safe off on the gun, and my hands were so cold I couldn't get the safe off. And I went to put it off, couldn't get it off. The deer's out of sight, so now he's gone. So I track him a ways, and he's running around. I said, I'll go back and track the other one. So, because I was closer to the other one than I was to this one. So I go back there. Don't I jump that one up the same way? Go to put the safe off. My hands were so cold, my thumb kept crumbling up. Never got a shot at either one of them. Jumped two big bucks on the same day. Never got a shot at either one. Happens. Stuff happens.
They were fighting, and then
they were fighting, right?
Yeah, some stuff happens. What's the craziest thing that's happened to you out on a track before? What are some memories that you wouldn't really believe unless you were there? That you had to have had you tracked 40 bucks a year on average. There had to have been some good ones.
Oh golly, let me think about that just a little bit. Probably, the funniest one was that buck, that 11-pointer I told you about there. 20 minutes after I picked up the track, I ended up killing him. That don't happen very often. Most of the time, it's miles away.
Yeah, got to take an easy one when you can get it.
Yeah, you said it. Oh, just think. Probably one of the unusual ones was the one with the wide spread there. There was a little over 25 outside. I had my wife with me. It was 1965. And she wasn't very big. My wife was about 5'2" at all, but she was in pretty good shape. And it was funny because we cut up over this mountain. I'd probably put about 10 miles on her that day, so she was tired. Come up over this mountain. It's called Moose River Ridge. I got right up there. It was thick on the top, and there's a lot of blowdowns there.
Yep.
And she come to the one blow, and it was too thick to get underneath, and it was a little bit too high for her to get over it. So I'm on the other side of it, and I said, Ruth, just put something on there, and I'll get you over. She says, how about my nose? It was right even with her nose. Anyways, we got over. I'm going to say, maybe half, 3/4 of a mile from the truck. And these two does come up. I think I told you at the beginning. And that she ended up seeing that buck before I did. Told me, no, not there. It's down there. And she couldn't see the sight on the rifle. So I ended up shooting it.
But you probably, that's probably half her buck anyway.
That's real. It should have been. It should have been hers. Well, I'm pretty sure she tagged it anyways.
Well, that's awesome. How many deer did she kill over the years?
I'm going to say 2. I told her every one that she mounted, I would end up mounting it for him. Every one she killed, I'd mount. Yep. So I mounted that first one that she killed. I took movies of it when she killed it, by the way. And the other one was a spike horn with one spike. And she saw it before I did and everything. And I said, well, shoot it if you want. So she shot it. And I said, you really don't want this mounted, do you? She says, no.
Where's that spike now? Somewhere.
Oh, probably out in the garage. There's this many horns out in the garage.
That's incredible. There's a lot of racks in here, and they're all, I'd say probably all mature bucks in here. Yeah, they're all
much,
big.
Yeah. I don't have anything that's under probably nothing that's under 3.5.
Yeah.
There's one story that I should tell you about. This is another one that I just wrote in the next book that we're doing. The deer was first thing in the morning. It was cold, like 16 above, and no snow. And I ended up jumping 2 or 3 deer. and it was back in the Newcomb area. I ended up jumping 2 or 3 deer. Anyways, they ran down below me, and I'm on the top of a ridge, so I'm running along on the top of the ridge. They're down below, so I blew back. I blew at them. They blew back and forth. I ended up going about halfway around this doggone ridge, probably a quarter mile running. Finally, I said, this is useless, so I stopped. So I said, no, there ain't no sense in chasing them anymore. They're scared. I go back to where I started, or where I first left off there, and started chasing around. And I said, probably ain't a deer within a half a mile of here. And I go just a little ways, and gee, all of a sudden this deer runs out. I look and it's got a rack, and it runs right behind, stops behind a tree. So anyways, I'm thinking, golly, if it comes out of that tree and it's running, I'm probably not going to hit it. It was about 100 yards away. I said, better shoot at his back end. So I shot the back end. I used to always think, if I could get a deer leaking a little bit, I could usually kill him, especially if there was snow on the ground. There was no snow, but I shot anyways. Well, the deer took off. I ended up hitting it in the back leg and breaking the femur bone, but it didn't break the femoral artery. And I chased that deer until, and this story will be in a book, so I don't want to spoil it altogether. I chased that deer until pretty late in the afternoon, and it finally went out on a pond that I thought he had fallen in on, and it turned out that he went out on ice, about that much ice. And when I got there, he had fallen, he couldn't get back up. So I ended up killing him right on the ice. So now I got to figure out how I'm going to get him off. He's like 30 yards out in this pond. So I got thinking, I said, well, if I carry a big hunk of softwood with me, one of the spruce trees that's all dead, that's if I fall through, at least I can get back up on this doggone tree. So I inch my way out there, grab a hold of the deer's horn and get back. I finally get him back in, and I end up dressing him out. So I figured, well, I said, I better come back the next day because it was almost dark. So I went back to camp. I was about 6.5 miles from the camp where I killed the deer. I said, I'll come back the next day, and I said, I'll pack that deer out. So I got the deer on my back, and I started carrying. I said, man, this feels good. It took me 3.5 hours to go to 6.5 miles, which I said, man, I must really be in shape. It was so strange. The deer had a tag in its ear. It was 7.5 years old and weighed 135 pounds. And that's why I was able to carry it so long.
Wow.
Just unusual. One of those
big, 130 pound, but big mature buck.
Yeah, 7.5 years old. And the reason we knew it was because it had a tag in its ear. They tagged it when it was a spike horn.
Is that some kind of a study the state was doing?
It was Anna and Archer Huntington Preserve. And I don't know if they hired the state in there or if they did it on their own. But it was right near Newcomb there. And that was how we used to hunt this edge of that property. They used to charge hunters to come in there and hunt it, but we never paid to hunt anywhere. So hunt the outskirts and end up doing just as good.
Yep.
But that was funny. I just, the deer was 7.5 years old, weighed 135 pounds, and it scored 122. It wasn't like it was a, scraggly thing.
Now, you said that was, 6.5 miles from camp?
Yeah.
Is that from your deer camp or from like a base camp somewhere?
Base camp.
So
we were another I think 6 or 7 miles from there to where we parked.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this was another 6 miles back in.
So you're 12 miles from where you parked?
Yeah, where we parked.
Now that's just got to be a great feeling.
That was, yeah. A lot of places. We hunted, it was the same thing. I killed another buck up there another year. In fact, this one right up there, it's got a third antler, that one. I don't know if you can see it.
Yep.
It's got a third antler. Anyways, we was up there, and it was a cold river. And up by the cold river, there was a couple of horse barns that they had there. And I hunted all the way up there, didn't see very much, snow on the ground. And I come back down, and a deer had crossed it right where I was. Crossed right where I'd walked up the trail there. And I looked, and I said, it was between that time when I went up and come back. So I decided to trail him. So I tracked him a little ways, and now I'm about 12 miles from the camp. I started tracking him, and I tracked him, and it was like 3:30 in the afternoon then, and I jumped the thing, and I couldn't get a good shot at him, so I run up ahead, and I ended up catching him coming along there, so I ended up killing him. Anyhow, I was on the other side of a cedar swamp where I killed him, and it was just deer trails through the cedar swamp. So anyways, where I killed him, I just dressed him out. I said, come back tomorrow. That's just because it's just too late now to do anything with him. So I get my cousin Alan. He was always willing to help somebody. He's a little short guy, about 5'5", weighed 135, 140 pounds.
He was back at camp?
Yeah, back to camp. So he said, Jim, I'll go back with you tomorrow. I'll help you get that deer out. So there was a lot of it that was decent road that, you know, they used to bring their horses and wagons and stuff on. And so I pushed the deer cart almost all the way to where I could get that deer. And I had to carry it across this swamp. So I carried it across the swamp, get it in there. We start back out now. Like I told you, it was 12 miles from the camp. We get about, I don't know, I'm going to say 2 miles from the camp. I'm sure it was Callahan Brook or another brook. Anyways, my cousin says, I can't go no more. He said, I can't help you no more. So I says, okay. I said, you know, I'll leave the deer here. I'll come back tomorrow and get them. I'll help you tomorrow. I says, okay, well, don't worry. I said, we'll leave it here because there was still snow on the ground. Mm-hmm. So we get back to camp, and naturally I walked ahead of him. I got back there probably a half an hour or better before he did. Had supper, got up in the morning. And he said, Jim, I can't go with you. I can't walk. So I went back. I pushed the deer the rest of the way out. But anyway, so we figured where I shot the deer, we said it was, I thought it was about 10.5 miles. Them guys thought it was 12.5. So we settled on 8.5. It was 8.5 miles from the camp where I killed him.
Is that one of your? Is that one of your farthest back that you
probably?
Ever
yeah, probably was. Yeah, one of the farthest that I know of because we kept track of distances. You know, a lot of people wonder how could you keep track. I did an awful lot of running. I know how fast I could run. I know how long it took me to run a mile. I know how long it took me to walk a mile. Mm-hmm. So that was how I kept pretty close track of. You could be off an hour, maybe a mile, but not that much.
Plus, you had topo maps and stuff. You could look at
You're
it.
Right, look at the topo maps, and we did that a lot too, Pat.
Now, what would you carry in when you're going to set up a base camp? You know, you weren't. It's not like you weren't going up a river with a big tent and a canoe. You were hauling stuff into your base camp.
We always got permission of the tent for the whole season. We were able to do that. We knew the Rangers pretty well. We were able to tent for the whole season. We would go up a week before the season started. We would cut our wood usually by Labor Day weekend, so the wood was ceasing to dry. We'd go back up a week before the season started, set the outfit up, and then come back in and hunt for the whole season out of that one place.
Okay.
And we did that almost every time. I set it up a little bit early one time, and I knew the ranger well, and he flew over the place and he saw it. We had plastic, and it was light plastic, and he was able to see it from the air. He calls me up. He said, Jim's. He said, your camp's up. I said, yeah. He says, it shouldn't be. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, tear it down. So I hiked all the way back in, tore the thing all down, go back the following week and put it back up. Just shows you the things we did. And the other thing was my father found all the places for us to hunt. He would go off on the trails and find these places. He said, I think we're going to hunt over there next year. It looks good. There's a lot of deer sign around there. And we would hunt wherever he wanted to set up, and boy, we always had good luck.
How many guys would go out of the remote
We had
camp?
6. We had 6 guys, and the first part of the times we started doing that, I had a bunch of relatives that hunted. Their name was Hart, and they used to camp right next to us. We camped right pretty close together. And then after a while, it got to be a little bit too much. Those guys didn't camp where we did, so we camped miles and miles apart. They still camped, but they didn't go as far back as we did.
And how would you guys decide, where you're going in the morning and, would just go off in different directions from camp?
Normally, different directions. And anybody come back to camp at night, what did you see? What did you see? What did you see? And the place where they saw the most, or people jumped the deer or saw a lot of sign, that's where we'd go the next day. But we did well, I'll tell you, golly. I think one of the roughest years we had was the year of 1970, 71, 71, 72, 72, 73 were 3 of the worst weathers they had in the Adirondacks for killing deer. A lot of deer died. And I think we didn't do well at all. If you saw a deer at all, you come back to camp and say, I saw a deer today. Most of the time, out of 6 guys, nobody even saw a deer. So they were that scarce. And I don't know if they ever came back since that time. At least it was really something. I remember it was, I think probably just before Christmas, my wife and I rode up to camp. We had a camp right on Limekell Lake Road. I just gave it to my nephew, by the way. Anyways, we had to camp there, and it was only like, I don't think it was 100 yards off the road. It took me almost 20 minutes just to get to the camp because the snow was so deep. And my wife didn't even try. I went up to the camp and just checked things over and come back out. But that was, goodness, some wicked years. Did you hardly see any deer?
Yeah, I mean, and the deer are eating, it must be tough, real tough eating in the Adirondacks when the snow is high.
Snow is so high, yeah. And the deer, they yard up in them evergreen swamps and stuff like that and them lowlands. and they eat themselves out of health and home, you know. So what happens is a lot of deer die like that. Golly, it was a shame because so many of them died. But what do you know? What are you going to do? That's nature, right?
Yeah. What was the routine like at the remote camp? So when you'd get back, so you'd be there for the whole season, right?
Yes.
So what was it typically like at night? You'd go back and you'd cook some food, have play cards. What would you guys do in there?
Okay. I remember one of the outfits we had was 8.5 miles back to it. So you got out of work. You'd end up, even just for a weekend, end up hauling back to the camp, get there at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, have a drink usually because we were all boozers, have a drink usually, and then go to bed. My father always got up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, all hunt, come back the next day, talk about who's seen what, whatever. And usually we went up on a Thursday or Friday, so we'd have 2 days. Mm-hmm. Always went to church on Sunday. So we'd hunt hard like an animal the next day, get up the next morning, do pretty much the same thing, or else start heading out and go to church. And come back at night, you're so tired, all you did was talk a little bit. My father had always planned the meals ahead of time. He used to take spaghetti and freeze spaghetti sauce, and then all you had to do was make the spaghetti. And then he used to give each one of us a menu, like you had to make this, you had to make this, and you had to make that. And that's what we'd do. So we didn't have to do hardly any cooking. Breakfast was all. Somebody made your own lunch when you went out. And most of us never got back until darker after. So there was no card playing.
Yeah.
A couple of drinks and eat supper and go to bed.
Yeah, because it was serious deer hunting.
Yeah, serious deer hunting. That's right, yeah. Most of the time we were in bed by 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. But, up at 4:30 the next morning to hunt.
Did you lug a wood stove back in there?
Yeah, we had a wood stove. I was a sheet metal worker, and I made most of our own stoves that we had, just out of sheet metal, and they worked good. They burned out in a couple of years because of the metal, but anyways, we left them right there in the camp. We stored a lot of stuff in 55-gallon drums. Now, in those days, you weren't supposed to leave anything in the woods, but it seems like the Rangers had a soft spot in their hearts for us because we'd hide the stuff and they wouldn't look for it. It was good. We had some real good Rangers there. As far as we were concerned, anyways.
Thanks for watching. Tune in again next week for part 2 with Jim Massett.